away to a West Catholic. Anybody remember West Catholic High School? Okay, well, we gave away to West Catholic High School. They have a tournament, and you saw all those golf carts out there, and that's the reason for that. I remember West Catholic. I worked at Channel 6 with Dick Clark on a show called American Bandstand. Perhaps you may remember that. And all the girls from West Catholic used to come over, and they'd walk over to the studio at 46 The Market, go into the ladies' room, change out of their uniform, and put on a skirt and a blouse. And they weren't allowed to dance. The school would not allow them to dance in uniform. So they had to bring a change of clothes in order to be. And Jerry Blavitt at the time was what they call a regular. Do you remember what a regular was on Bandstand? That means he had the right to be on any time he showed up. So that's my thinking about West Catholic. I'm glad you're here, and I just wanted to mention a couple of things, if I may. The fact that I'm sure you read that John Batty, who was a member in good standing of our broadcast pioneers, has passed away, and he was a Quaker. I don't know if you've ever been to a Quaker memorial or not, but I had never been, and it was really an experience. It was at the up in Jenkintown. I think it's the Abington Friends, Bud. The Abington Friends. You sit down. There's no minister. There's no leader. A lady stood up and said, "If you don't know how Quakers have a memorial, we'll have a moment of silence, and then if anyone wants to speak, they're more than welcome." So we sat down, there was a moment of silence, and people stood up and said, "My name is so-and-so, so-and-so, and I work with John at the radio station," or "I was related to him," or "he was my neighbor." And for a solid hour, different people stood up and talked about how John Batty had helped them or had some instance in their lives. It really got to me. It was a spectacular memorial. I said to my wife, "This is what I want. The only thing is I'm not too sure if I can get enough people to talk for an hour to say nice things about me." However, yes.
I'll talk for an hour, but not.
However, it was a very impressive service, and there were 5 of us representing Broadcast Pioneers, because his widow listed in the obituary that in lieu of flowers, funds should be sent to Broadcast Pioneers. Bud Gallo brought his widow with us, and she wants to say a few words. Bud, you want to introduce her?
I'd like to all of you to meet Janelle Batty, who is here, who wants to speak just a few minutes about John and her thanks to you. Jan?
Come to the microphone.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm not as used to the microphone as he was, believe me. First, I would like to thank all of you who attended the service for John. My daughters and I are very, very appreciative. Most of you have met John through his years here at the Broadcast Pioneers. He was a man who fell in love with broadcasting at age 14, and the love affair never ended. As we traveled before we had children, we would drive to stations he had admired. In particular, I recall WSB in Atlanta, located on Peachtree Street. But everywhere you turn, there's another Peachtree Street. 5 points that come together. Finally, at 11:15 p.m., we found WSB in Atlanta. He started his career at WRUF, licensed in 1929 as a commercial station and an educational station for the University of Florida, an excellent training ground for announcers, as close to the real world as you could get. John received the Red Barber Award for Excellence in Broadcasting and a $25 check. From there, we went to WNOG in Naples, Florida, then to WEAT in West Palm Beach, Florida. He wanted a major market and was hired by WCAG in Westchester, PA. Not major market, but close. Then to WNBF in Binghamton, and as soon as we got there, we knew we didn't want to stay there. So back to Pennsylvania, to Abe and George Boron at WQAL, then to WISH, then to WDBR, then Easy 101 for 18 years, then to WJZ in New Jersey, and he ended his career at WRDV in Hatboro, doing a Wednesday morning show and enjoying every minute of it. In the 47 years of marriage, he never once complained about going to work. And I'm sort of suspicious that not many of you have complained about going to work either. You have been his band of brothers. You have been his fraternity. And he was very, very proud to be part of the Broadcast Pioneers. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure by now he's already gotten a job at CBS, Celestial Broadcasting Corporation. Okay? Yeah. All right, I want to introduce Dory Lenz, who just has a few words to say about our upcoming or our current elections, and then we'll have lunch, okay? By the way, while she's coming up here, Jack Ryan was there at the service. Bud Gallo was there. Nat Wright was there. Dave Custis, where's Dave?
Right here.
Dave was there.
Christian Johnson was there.
Yes.
Dave Roberts flew up from Florida to join us.
Quite a few people over there, and it was just a charming, I mean, if you can have a charming memorial, this one was one of them. Oh, and who sang?
My daughter.
Her daughter sang, at the end, sang a song, so it was just beautiful.
Thank you, Bill. I gave you the slate in April, and we did not get any petitions to add to the slate. Yes, most unusual. No, I'm joking, of course. I think in the history of our organization, no one has ever argued the slate. These are the people elect and who will be inducted in June. For our president, Frank Hogan. Frank, would you stand? Vice President Jerry Wilkinson, Barry Reisman, and Marie Pantarelli. Chairman of the board, of course, will be Bill Weber, Secretary, Treasurer, and it is the one office in our organization that can go on forever if they're willing to do all of the hard labor.
Shirley.
Our wonderful Shirley Morris.
Yay, Shirley!
In addition to our regular board members who serve 3-year terms, we have now 3-year termers: Diego Castellanos, Keith Brand, Pat Delsey, Robert Dome, Richard Kearney, Carter Mearbreyer, John Roberts, and Cal Rudman. Thank you.
Hey, Cal. All right, let's have our lunch. Of the radio and television community, we worked at TV towers. How many? What stations?
He worked at 1210 WPHT.
PHT. He helped put up their tower.
He also installed the broadcast equipment for the Republican convention in 2000.
So he was associated with Philadelphia Broadcasting. If you were to look up Nick Berg and you Googled it, Nick Berg, and what was the next one? What was
Nick Berg, Philadelphia Broadcasting.
Nick Berg, Philadelphia Broadcasting. The first website that comes up is Broadcast Pioneers. And for a while we were off.
We kept going offline because we were getting so many hits.
Thousands and thousands of hits all over the country. Trying to follow that story. So it's an interesting one. We've been sitting talking to this pretty young lady, the youngest lady in the room, the youngest person in the room. I think she's younger than some of the waitresses. I'm not sure. Are they throwing any plates my way?
I got a special dessert coming up for you.
Her name is Dawn Timony, and no, she's not related. She says that's the first thing they ask, if she's related to the former police commissioner, but they spell it differently. This young lady is really a product of our area. She was born and raised in the Philadelphia area. She worked up in Allentown at a TV station, and then she worked in Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, at a station that I worked for, not the same time, but WBRE, which is a very, very important station up in the Wyoming Valley. I don't know if you know Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, but Scranton, Wilkes-Barre was one of the first markets that went UHF because they had difficulty picking up Philadelphia's signal because of the mountainous regions. Scranton, Wilkes-Barre is arguably the third or fourth market in Pennsylvania. She was the anchor for the 6 and 10, 5, 6, and 11. The lead anchor for over 7 years. So she's come back into Philadelphia. She is the morning anchor, 5 to 7 o'clock on channel WCAU, channel 10. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Dawn Timony.
Thanks for inviting me. I don't know, sitting at this table, I think your stories are a lot more interesting than my stories. I'm really enjoying myself here. Quite a history lesson. Well, I can't call myself a pioneer exactly. We all know there have been many women before me in our industry, a lot of blondes before me. In fact, the other morning we had a breaking news story. 2 blondes walked into a building. Geez, I thought one of them would have seen the building. That was my husband's joke. He said, you gotta tell a joke. Okay, so now he's gonna say to me when I get home, did you tell my blonde joke? So I can say, honey, I told your joke, and they laughed. So, okay, I'm glad that's over with. But my career is not quite as adventurous or heroic as the pioneers Lewis and Clark, and it certainly had some peaks and valleys over the years, as sure many of us have all had. We deal with reality every day of man's accomplishments and some of the gruesome aspects of things that are going on, like we're seeing in Iraq right now. And unfortunately, we seem to lead with those stories in the news, and you can get it 24 hours a day on cable. I'm not going to critique the industry or dissect it, although we've all done it over the years. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and my story, and hopefully you'll find it a little interesting. I'm finding many of the stories here extremely interesting, and it's interesting how paths have crossed just at different times. I'm a graduate of Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts, and when I graduated college, I was looking for a job, and my dad was also looking for a job for me, as you can imagine, right? So I came home from school, and my parents had a house in the Pocono Mountains, and my dad actually heard this woman sign off on the radio station, WPCN AM radio, said she was getting married, blah, blah, blah. So he calls me up, he goes, the girl is leaving. You gotta go try for the job. I'm like, oh my God, Dad. I didn't even have a car. He drove me to the interview. And he waited in the parking lot. Guess what? I got the job. And it was the morning news. I don't know if this is my fate here. Here I am on the morning news. But I actually got the job and did that for some time, and decided I definitely wanted to go into television since that's what I had studied at Emerson. But I didn't have a resume tape. It's kind of a catch-22 situation. You need to have a tape to get the job. So dear old Dad, to the rescue again. He worked for a company in Easton, Pennsylvania called SI Handling Systems, and he was one of the directors there. So he got one of his guys who did industrial videos. Nothing like any of us in this room have ever seen. And we got some footage. I don't know. If you saw this tape today, I would have to hide my head under the table. But it got me my first job in television at WFMZ in Allentown. And so that's basically where I got my start in TV. And from there, I ended up in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton. And that's where I spent a lot of the past several years. I started out, I think, weekend reporting. I actually remember my first assignment, though, at WFMZ. It was reporting on a landfill situation. And ironically, how small this business is. David Murphy from Channel 6 also worked at WFMZ at the same time I worked there. And typically when you start out at a station, they have you shadow somebody. And David Murphy was the person who I shadowed, and here he is down here at Channel 6. And then I think my first official story on my own was a landfill story, which I'm so excited. I just couldn't stand it. Now, you're assigned a landfill story. You're like, oh my God, a landfill story. But I eventually made my way up into the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton market, and I think I worked every shift there was there. I did the morning news, and then I became the evening news anchor. I did the 5, the 6, and the 11. And as I was telling Bill, and he knows, it was actually a family-owned and operated station. A family called the Baltimores owned it. It was really a terrific place to work. They really cared about the people. I worked with it was one of the, I remember it celebrating a landmark anniversary, and they had all the old pictures and the films, and it was quite an operation they had there. But as times change, so did the business, and we eventually got bought by a bigger station and then merged, and everything changed. But I remember a couple stories from when I was anchoring the news desk up in Wilkes-Barre. I remember, and my co-anchor at the time was Keith Martin, who is now Governor Ed Rendell's Homeland Security Chief. So, and he was very involved with the National Guard. And I remember one evening there was a bat in the studio, and it was flying around. It was like attracted to the lights, and it kept swooping down in front of my camera. And Keith, don't worry, I'll save the day, He's like, it's not going to hurt you. I said, I'm not really worried about it hurting me. I'm just worried about where it's going to land, and if it's going to be live on the air while I'm reading my stories. I don't care if it lands on you while you're reading your stories. But it was, and I remember they trapped it in like a back room behind the studio. So the next day we came in and we're still wondering, was the bat in the studio or had the bat vanished? But it eventually did vanish. I remember another evening doing the news, and I don't know, how the styles change. I had these horrible big clunky earrings on, and they were clip-ons, and I was reading the news, and it was the lead story. Not a nice story, and my earring fell off, and it had to have been like the longest fall to the news desk. It was horrible. I'm reading, and all of a sudden it's like, gee, it was like slow motion, hits my shoulder all the way down, like hits the desk. And of course, my husband said, don't worry, no one probably saw it. Every person I ran into, I think for the next month, said, oh, I felt so bad for you. I saw that happen. And you really can't miss it. What are you going to do? You just have to keep on going. If it had been a lighthearted story or a different situation, you could have made light of it. But anyway, I went on. Eventually, I decided to leave Channel 28 as the business changed. We merged with a station up in the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton area, Channel 22. They were the CBS affiliate, and it was a shared services agreement, which I guess different stations in radio and TV are now doing. And our competitor all of a sudden became our partner, which was very odd for a lot of us, because we would actually go out on a story and then we'd come back and we'd have to share the tape with the person that we were up against. And it just became a real money-making venture, and people weren't people. And I would come home and I'd say to my husband, oh, I don't want to go to work today. Unlike you were saying, your husband said he never ever said he didn't want to go to work. And that's when my husband said, if you don't like it, then quit. And fortunately, I was in a position at that point in my life that I quit. And people were like, oh my God, you're quitting, you don't have another job lined up? What are you doing? You're nuts. And I did it. We traveled in Spain for a month. I came home. I think I got together 50 resume tapes and 100 resumes. And a friend of mine called me up and said, oh, Connie Cola from Channel 10 had left the morning anchor slot. Why don't you send your tape down? So I sent my tape down. And I actually called Steve Levy. And I said, could you at least see if you can, he was a friend of a friend. And I remember him calling me back, and he's now my co-anchor, and he's such a sweetheart. I remember calling me back, and he left a message on my answering machine. Hi, Dawn, this is Steve Levy. I was like, oh my God, he called me back. I can't believe it. And I said, I just wanted to see if I sent you my tape, if you could make sure it got on the news director's desk. And he did. And they said, well, they didn't have the morning anchor slot available. They'd already assigned it to somebody else at that particular point. And he said, but, we're looking for a reporter if you're interested. Steve Schwade, the news director at the time. I'm like, sure. So he said, well, if we don't call you tomorrow, call me on Friday. Well, within 45 minutes, the assistant news director called me, set up an appointment. I came down on a Thursday, and I was hired on the spot. Saw those naysayers who said, never quit when you don't have something else lined up. So here I had, left a job that I was unhappy with and ended up getting a job in the Fourth Market, which I had always dreamed of doing because I was actually born in Lankenau Hospital. I went to the George School in Bucks County. My sister went to the Shipley School. My grandmother was a nurse at Bryn Mawr Hospital. I just have a lot of roots here. So this was something I've always dreamed of. I'd grown up watching the local anchor people. Lisa Thomas-Lurie, I know she's at Channel 6, but I did grow up watching her and some of the other people. So it was, a dream come true for me to come down and work here. But shortly after I got down here, I found out I was pregnant. And so I continued to work, and I rented a house, and my husband lived in Wilkes-Barre because we hadn't moved down here yet because I had started out.
He did come and visit you once in a while.
Obviously, right? And everybody at Channel 10 was pregnant at that time. They kept saying, something's in the water. So I was afraid to tell the news director because I'd been hired because everybody was going to be going out on maternity leave, and here I find out that I was pregnant. And they were terrific, absolutely terrific. But I was per diem, although I was working full time. I was working 5 days a week. I wasn't a staff member. So my doctor eventually said to me, you got to pick a hospital, get a doctor, or you're going to have this baby in a news truck. So it's happened. Well, fortunately it wasn't me, but boy, the photographers were so sweet. Chuck Williams at Channel 10, I remember him helping me out of a news van. I was very pregnant in a snowstorm. I said, Chuck, would you do this if I wasn't pregnant? He goes, no. But I think he would because he's a sweetheart. But anyway, I stopped working and I had my daughter, whose name is Una, Irish for Unity, O-O-N-A, who's the absolute joy of my life. And I took some time off to spend with Una. And I also happened to get a little sick after I had her, so I was ill. And everybody said to me, you're never going to get back into the business if you take too much time off. And Steve Schwade was the news director at the time. He left. Chris Blackman came in. So it's kind of, I think, unheard of to take like a year or so off after you get a job in a major market with your child and not be staff. Like Renee Chenault-Patat took some time off, but she was staff and had been there a long time. And so I kind of had to fight my way back in as a per diem reporter on the weekends, even though I'd been there. So I was driving from Philadelphia to Wilkes-Barre, putting in 14, 15-hour days just to get back and forth. And the news director called me in and said, I'm sure you know we're looking for a morning anchor. I'm thinking, I don't know, I didn't hear that because I only work 2 days a week at 4 a.m., the ungodly shift that no one wanted, but I just wanted to try to keep my foot in the door. And he said, we'd like you to audition with Steve Levy, which was the original job I had wanted in the first place. I said, sure. And I remember getting Larry Mente's scripts from the night before and reading over them, and came in, did the audition, told dear old Dad, and he was really rooting for me. Oh, this is great. I know you're going to get it. I know you're going to get it. And I said, now don't jinx it, Dad. But so then they called me up and said, oh, we need you to do a couple shows. So basically they were going to have me do live auditions. They'd gotten a waiver from the union, but they didn't tell me. They just said, we need you to fill in. And I'm like, okay. And I said, well, I thought I was going to fill in reporting. It turns out on the anchor desk. So I said, sure. And then I had reported, I was doing the 11 o'clock reporting, had driven back to Wilkes-Barre, checked on my daughter when I got home at 1 a.m., and she was sick all night. It was terrible. So the next morning, the phone is ringing in our house, and we have a zillion cordless phones. Well, do you think we could find one? No. I'm in PJs that my husband doesn't like a whole lot. I smell like baby puke, and I can't find a phone. I finally put on the speaker phone in the kitchen, no sleep, and it is the general manager's secretary asking me could I be in that night. It's really kind of a fairy tale story. And I said, sure, what time? And he said, well, what time's good for you? And I said, well, a little later would be better. So I had a 2-hour drive and thought I might get a little bit of a nap. So I drove back down. My husband actually drove me down. And that was December 23rd, almost a year and a half ago, that they offered me the morning anchor job at Channel 10. So I've been doing the morning news with Steve Levy and Bill Henley since then, and it's an absolute pleasure. It's a tough shift. It's hard to get up in the morning. My daughter will be 3 at the end of June. She's a character. I think she is destined for this business. She loves the mic. She watches me on the news. I say, "What's your name?" And her last name is actually Tracy. And she says, "Una Timony." And so she hears me say, "Dawn Timony, NBC 10 News." But, so I've been pretty fortunate. I've never had to leave Pennsylvania for East Podunk for that first job. I went from Allentown, well, I should say Mount Pocono to Allentown to Wilkes-Barre to Philadelphia, and this is where I want to be. So I'm home, and I'm raising my daughter down here and reminiscing of old times. I remember my grandfather used to take me to Bryn Mawr Bank. What is the big bank on the corner? But back then, it was a big deal. You went to the bank. And I remember, you know, he was always dressed up in a suit like you did. There was no ATM cards, and he was in his suit and all dressed up. I remember when we went to the bank. I remember him taking me downtown to John Wanamaker's at Christmas time on the train to see the Christmas displays. So I feel very lucky. Yeah, just like typewriters and all kinds of things. I know. Well, we just sold our house up in the Wilkes-Barre Scranton area. My husband had a couple old typewriters, and he's lugging them down here. I go, "What for?"
Teach your child.
Teach
Where are
my
you
child.
living now?
We live in West Mount Airy right now, about 5 minutes from the station on a dead-end street on Fairmount Park. We said you'd never know we were in the city of Philadelphia. It's absolutely beautiful. And so that's my story.
Well, what we want to do
I
is...
don't know if anybody has any questions. I don't know. I've heard so many stories. I feel like mine are minuscule compared to...
Can we open it up for any questions? Bud?
Uh-oh.
Are the studios still on South Franklin Street?
Yes, they are. Yes, they
That's
are.
where I started.
Really?
I got my broadcast license. I couldn't get a job because I didn't have somebody endorse the license. And the chief engineer there said, "Well, if you work here for nothing, I will sign your license."
Wow.
So I worked 6 months at BRE and signed my license.
But now there are 2 stations in that building and 2 studios, so it's really changed.
It's really crowded.
Yeah, it's very crowded.
And I was living at the YMCA at 15th and Arch and got a job for Kasser Distillers, King's Wine, to do a show at WBRE 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a car, I took the Frank Martz bus company, which is still there, up to Wilkes-Barre, did the show at WBRE, and came back every Thursday for 26 weeks. And Neil Harvey, who just passed away, would have gotten the job, but they wouldn't give him time off at Channel 6. A fellow named Jay Benneman. Does anyone know that name? Jay Benneman auditioned me, and I went up and did at WBRE in Wilkes-Barre. So it's amazing how these chords...
Did you know Franklin Coslett?
Oh, yes!
Because it's an interesting story. I wasn't around when he was around, but his granddaughter was an intern at WBRE when I was there, and they joked because they said Franklin didn't think that women belonged in the business.
Exactly.
And we said how ironic that his granddaughter was an intern then all those years later. I know he was kind of a legend up there.
Yes, he was.
He was the big newsman.
Right, he was the big guy, and I guess he signed off the news every night the same way.
Right.
What did he say? Does anybody remember what he
I
said?
can't remember. That's 55 years ago.
Well, you know, this Scranton Wilkes-Barre is in the Wyoming Valley, which is a dish situation with mountains all the way around it. This was one of the first cities that went UHF. And it was extremely popular because they couldn't pick up the Philadelphia signal because they were in this bowl. And there are 3 UHF stations up there, and they were all doing exceptionally well. It was one. And the man she's talking about is a man named Dave Baltimore, who started WBRE and whose son ran it for a long while.
That was the first, WBRE was the first television station in that market. It was number 1 for many years, and then WNEP, which is the ABC affiliate, eventually became kind of the powerhouse up in that market. And I believe it's owned by the New York
I
Times.
used to work with Lynn. Baltimore.
Lynn Baltimore, the daughter. I don't know her, but
She was at NBC Sports.
wow.
Wasn't two things, Channel 22 up there at one time was WDAU, because it was on
Correct.
the Bulletin.
Right,
Like
that's
the
absolutely
CAO
correct.
by the Bulletin.
But then they changed the call letters
I
to,
think when the Bulletin sold. to
it's now
CBS.
WYOU, Channel 22. And that had to do, I guess, a couple sisters owned that station and then sold it, and then it got sold again.
I've got a question.
Uh-oh.
I walked in here, love,
No.
and you look like Florence Henry. Has anybody,
You do.
You look like a very young Florence Henry. There's another clear for you.
Well, Terry Baltimore was teasing me. He says, you got your prison stripes on. You're not wearing that, are you? I said, Terry, you wear the same blue blazer every day. I said, this is a local designer, Paula Hine. We got to support our own here.
Any other
I have
questions?
one other question, Dawn, about Channel 69. Very successful, and it's amazing, and they emphasize news. Why is it that more independent stations don't follow them? You worked there a number of years.
I don't know the answer to that question. That's a family-owned station, too. I'm trying to think, I go back in my memory to think of the owner of that station.
I get it on my cable.
Yeah, and the people have been there. Some of the, like Rob Vaughn, who was the anchor man there, he was there when I was leaving. He's been there for a long, long time. And a couple people behind the scenes who I know are super, super talented have stayed. So they obviously have the money to pay the people. I don't know. It obviously has to, I'm assuming it's got to be money, ultimately money.
A Spanish news broadcast.
Yeah. But,
Do you know who our speaker is going to be in June? Diane Allen.
wow. Well, it was funny. My family's been pretty influential in my life. My father had to put his 2 cents in my whole life, but he certainly helped me get to where I am today. And my grandmother, who passed away right before I got the job initially in Allentown, I had gone up for the interview, and she told everybody that I got a job on TV, but I hadn't gotten the job yet. And then she passed away before I actually got the job, and I was at her memorial service, and all our friends were like, oh, you're the granddaughter who's on TV. I said, well, now I am. I said, all right, Grandma. But her maiden name was Allen, A-L-L-E-N, and that's my middle name. It's Dawn Allen Timony.
Oh, okay.
So she kept thinking that I should lose the Timony. She didn't like my dad much, and that I should have been Dawn Allen. So, but since Diane Allen was already down here, that slot was taken.
So we have anchors now and anchors then for Diane, and she's going to talk about how you go from an anchor chair to the Senate.
Right, and wasn't she a teacher first, too? Wasn't she a teacher, an anchor person, and then a senator?
I don't know. They're having their own conversation.
What's going on over there?
Carter Murray is telling dirty stories.
Joe said,
Listen.
No, it said Alan here or Alan there, and I said that's called Anchors Away.
you have a very low level of humor.
Yeah.
Any other bill?
They're a good audience.
That's why you're in the back, right?
Right.
Actually, I thought he just got the blonde joke.
Hi, I'm Bill Wright Sr., and I just want to say to you that, as I recall my history in this market, I came here in 1957 with Storer Broadcasting Company, and it occurs to me that in 3 years, if I'm still alive, I will be half a century in Philadelphia. That, today, I would like to wish you.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very nice. I appreciate that, especially in this highly competitive, rough business that we're in these days.
What is your father telling you to do now?
He's keeping quiet. He doesn't want to push a good thing, right? But I have to laugh because he watches me every morning from 5 until 7. Now, the news, if you watch in the morning, is geared for people watching for about 10 to 15 to 20 minutes. And then we repeat basically the same thing over and over again. But he watches that whole 2-hour block.
It's KYW with pictures.
And I say, God love you, Dad. And when I was first on, my parents are divorced, but they're friends, and he would call my mother up. He's like, she's on, she's on. I was like, I know she's on, but I also know I can watch her at 7:25 for 3 minutes and still see that she's okay. But my father was the worst. If ever I was not on the news, and he's always been able to watch me during during my career. He could watch me when I was in Allentown. He could watch me when I was in Wilkes-Barre, and now he can still watch me. He lives in the Poconos now, and he's in real estate. He would constantly call me if he didn't see me on TV. Is everything okay? Are you sick? What's going on? I said, Dad, don't call me every time you don't see me. You know, maybe I'm playing hooky. I don't know, but it was so funny. I mean, never fail. The phone would ring the second I wasn't on. Where are you? Is everything okay? But
Any other questions?
Yeah. Dawn, how's Sheila Allen's health?
I don't think it's terrific, to be honest with you. I'm not sure. It's hard because you hear kind of things through the grapevine. I know she's recovering at home and she's still suffering from some heart problems. I think it's unclear if she'll be back or not, but I don't know that for a fact. Her husband, Lonnie, is a shooter at Channel 10, and we periodically ask. But hopefully she'll be back. I think she adds a certain sparkle to the news. So she's a nice lady. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it. But she's hanging in there.
Thank you.
Dawn, hold on a second. Pat Delsey wants to make a presentation.
Number one, thank you very much for
my
coming.
pleasure.
We really enjoy it, all right? Under normal circumstances, we would give about $1,000 to our speaker, but because of budgetary problems over the last 25 years, but we do want to give you something so you'll remember your stay with us here. We thank you for being with us. This is a logo watch. It's the Broadcast Pioneers logo, and when you're jogging or something like that, you're not dressed up, you can wear that in and know what time it is and think of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate you inviting me here today. It's certainly an honor.
We're really, really proud to have you. Thank you. One more quick note. Does anyone know the name Bud Smith?
Yes.
Bud Smith was a booth announcer, among other things. Very, very fine comic. He and I got together. I worked with the PN. We got together. We made little bits for disc jockeys, funny voices and things like that. We sold them. Did fairly well. Jerry gets a piece of memorabilia from Channel 3. They were having a rocket launch down at Cape Canaveral, and instead of signing on the air when they normally do at 5 o'clock in the morning, they were going to sign on at 3 o'clock in the morning because the launch was going to be at 3:15. Bud Smith is the booth announcer. Does anyone know what a booth announcer? Well, Gene knows because he was a booth announcer. And I was a booth announcer for 10 years at Channel 6, I mean.
And piecework.
George Thomas was a booth announcer. Shelley Gross was a booth announcer. Neil Harvey. Dick Clark was a booth announcer.
Gary Gears.
Gary Gears. Okay.
Ralph Wenge.
Yes, Ralph Wenge.
Paul Norton.
Paul Norton, of course. Okay. 3 o'clock in the morning, Bud Smith signs the station on. No cameras, slides. Signs the station on the air. As he's signing the station on the air, notification comes from NBC that they've delayed the launch for an hour. 3 o'clock in the morning, Bud Smith starts to ad-lib with slides.
No camera.
Then he excuses himself, and you hear him running down to the news machine to rip and read. He's got to get something. And they kept telling him to stretch. He goes on and on and on. Finally, they have the launch. Just before the launch goes off, you hear Bud Smith say to his producer, well, the only saving grace about this is that no one is ever going to hear this. And now, 40 years later, that's the only piece of Bud Smith that we have for our archives. Is that amazing? And he said the only saving grace is no one's going to hear this. So be careful what you say, because 40 years later, a guy like Jerry may find it and put it in the archives. Thank you all for coming. Don't forget Diane Allen in June. Thank you again.